Well, first, a couple of words about myself. Well, I'm Sebastian Rode. Originally, I studied actually physics in Munich, then did my PhD on high-performance computer simulations, where kind of my love of Python started, while doing data analytics, and at the same time founded Djangsters, where we do like web development. We have 6 developers doing a lot of public sector projects, especially in the educational sector. And most of the examples I will talk about are kind of derived from that. So it really occurred, made the code better. When I say public or like educational, I mean like we manage like data for schools, essentially like test results, teachers can enter into systems. Well, just keep that in mind. It makes sense for the example. Well, but first of all, well, let's celebrate, right? Django 5.2 came just out. So a couple of examples will be about that release. But also, well, kind of looking at the timeline, we are here. So, right, and the last long-term release was 4.2. So many of you will probably upgrade from 4.2 to 5.2. And well, there's a bunch of changes which you can apply to your code, which makes your code probably nicer, easier. And well, yeah, these kind of things I will look at. Essentially, to put it into pictures, right? Often, and really often, Django is really great. Like with a few lines of code, you can do a lot of things, but sometimes you have to work against Django with a framework. It's not really clicking. And well, these are the kinds of changes I want to highlight, where with a new release, suddenly you have less lines of code. It gets easier to do certain things. So yeah, you become from sad developer to happy developer, essentially. Yeah, and with that, I would directly dive into it. So what's the example? As I said, right, like everyone probably went to school or has children that go to school or both. So we have a very simple example, right? We have a school A, a subset of pupils go to this school, and another subset of pupils and like go to school B, and people cannot go to both schools. So that's the situation we want to model, and that will be the example guiding us, well, kind of through the talk. So how would we model that in Django? Probably everyone knows, but still I will quickly go through it, right? We would have a class saying, okay, class school derived from model. Let's say school has a name, it's a char field, right? An address, another char field. Let's keep it simple. But let's say 123 Fake Street or something. And at least, well, in Germany or probably everywhere, they are somewhat numbered, so you can uniquely identify them. Well, again, let's say it's a 5-character number, so it's 001, 002, etc. And well, to make it like identifiable in the admin or like to expose it somehow, we have a string method saying, okay, it's usually identified by the name. And we have pupils. Well, they are identified by name. Peter Miller, for example, right? A birth date, which is a date field here. And well, now it's what kind of a little bit of interesting comes in, right? There's a foreign key to a school because they're exactly assigned to one school and they have to have this key. Well, so foreign key relation where we say, okay, related name pupils. So we can do school.pupils to get all the pupils of a school. And we say, well, on delete, if the school gets deleted, all the pupils get deleted as well. And we say again, pupil is identified by a name and well, its birth date here locally formatted. Yeah, just to make it more exciting. Okay, so with this, with this, I will dive into the first one, which is URL building. So let's suppose we have 2 views, right, URL patterns here. So one that lists all the schools called schools here, where we say, okay, we list all the schools like school A, B, C, etc. User can click on such a school, and then he gets directed to the pupils view, where we can pre-filter this. Essentially, to make URL building a little bit more complicated. So we list, again, pupils view, lists all the pupils, but we want to filter, for example, via query set parameters. Here, name filter Peter, ampersand school equals to 1, saying, okay, filter, show me all the pupils that go to school 1, and the name contains Peter. Make it even more complicated, we could also add like a fragment, right? Scroll to the red box on the page or the last element where the user used to be. So this used to be relatively simple. I mean, for URL parameters, this is simple in Django, but with these query strings added, it was kind of hacky. You had to build it yourself. There's 3 parts where we usually build this. It's in views, it's in templates via the URL template tag, or in tests where we use like the test client get pupils. We have to build this URL in here. We will go step by step and see how this became better. So there will always be a before slide and then the after slide in the Django release, how you can improve that. So we have a school lists, right? Saying, okay, well, like iterate over the schools, which we fetch from the database. And now we have to build said URL. So we say, if schools.pupils.exists, I mean, if there's no pupils in the school, there's no point to linking to it. We build the URL, well, saying reverse, hey Django, look up the URL to pupils.list. And now we have to build this query string ourselves, right? We add question mark, we have to URL encode the dictionary, say URL encode school, double point school ID to get this query set part. And we have to add the last position, same thing. We have to URL encode it so it works. Then we add it to the dictionary and finally render it in the corresponding, add it to the dictionary and in the last line render it in the corresponding HTML template. This is, well, kind of error prone, a little bit complicated. And now with Django 5.2, we can just put these query set and fragment parameters directly to reverse. So it's one function call here in the middle, rest stays the same. We don't have to care about, encoding anymore. We don't have to kind of care about that. It's none. Django takes care of all of this. Less code, easier. It's a nice little gem, which you can, if you upgrade to 5.2, simplify your code. Next one. Of course, we can also say we don't want to build a URL in the view, but we want to build it in a template. This would look something like this. You iterate, like, let's say schools is like schools.objects.all, right? So it's directly the database objects. We would, again, look up if pupils exist and then say, okay, first where the URL template tag, we look up what's actually the pupils list view. Okay, fine, that's like how it has been forever. And then we say we have to build this query set again, question mark, school ID, we have to use the template filter, URL encode to make sure spaces, etc. get properly encoded. And finally, can also add the hashtag, make it a link, okay, fine. Yeah. In Django 5.1, already introduced, there's the query string template tag, which, well, takes away all this template query string generations. So the question mark, several parameters, it gets all automatically nicely added, formatted. Yeah, less code, easier to use. Yeah, so really nice feature. There's one more thing where the query string template tag really shines is like if you have several parameters. As you know, the first one has to have this question mark, school equals to A. Second one is then and, school equals to B, and page equals to, for example. So we have pagination added here, right? And like if you have pagination, you want to change this URL, you would need to write code like this, which essentially takes the query set, keeps all the filters you already have in your view, but like changes because you want to go to the previous page or the next page, changes this page number to, well, creates a link with page equal to 1 for the previous page and page equals to 3 for the next page. So if we give in here previous page 1, next page 3 in this case, we have to copy the original GET request to keep the other query set parameter. And then, well, there can always be none if you're on the first page or if you're on the last page. If we have it, we override it. Well, the 2 by a 1 if it's the previous page, or the 2 by a 3 if it's the next page, append it to some dictionary, and then we can render it in the template. It's, well, very repetitive code. You have to have this for every view where you need the pagination. You can write such a helper function. Now you can just use the query string template tag. Because what does it do? Well, it also, if you don't change it, keeps the default request.get parameters, so it keeps the path and it keeps especially the query string parameters. So it will only, if we say here, query string page equal to previous page, and that will be 1, it keeps school A and school B up and only changes it to page equals to 3. So like we only have one line of code instead of a whole bunch of functions. We don't need any complexity in the view. So yeah, makes your life a lot easier essentially. Having talked about views, templates, now we're coming to tests. typically you have, unit tests, but you also have integration tests where you need the test client. So you would have code like this, where you say, okay, initialize a client. Maybe you need to log the user in or something. So you say client.first.login, and then you want to send a GET request to set list view. You say, well, and you have to, again, build the query set parameter yourself. You have to add the question mark, like here's an F string, URL encoded. Okay, great. Well, again, now that gets much simpler because the Django test client allows you to explicitly specify the query parameters. You have less logic in your tests. You can just test the results. That's great because the more logic you have in the test, the more you need to test your tests, and it gets really complicated. Okay, so we talked about URL building. Next one is protected views. So many times we don't want to build like a public website, but we want to build a website that essentially where the public part consists of a simple login, like a SaaS solution or like an internal tool for a company. So all the views will be protected. So the views look like this. We have essentially, we have to have each view we are defining. We have a login required decorators. We do some stuff. Usually it gets way more complicated than this. You have like a login required decorator, then you have to require certain roles, like some permissions you need to check. And even like in this case, it's again a real world example. We want to make sure like a certain study group of classes only shown to a teacher from the corresponding schools. If we have something like a required school permissions decorator, while you can test each of these decorators individually, you really want an integration test, especially on the login required, because if you forget it on one view, it's essentially publicly accessible. This became now much easier because there's the login required middleware. It seems like not much because you just add it to the middleware list in your settings supply. And now instead of views become opt-in for login required, they become opt-out. So all the views by default are login required. You don't have to care anymore about integration testing those. So you have to write less code, less testing, because you can rely on Django that it makes sure all the views you have in your project are protected by default. So it's not only less code, it's also safer, which is great. Yeah, exactly. So with that, yep. Okay, I'm coming to the admin. Well, customizing the admin is always fun, right? Well, most of the time it's fun, but like sometimes it's a little bit difficult, and it feels like the solutions are in the way. I will give a couple of examples where this became easier. So again, this is our example, right? We have pupils in schools. And well, if you click on pupils, well, we have a normal list where we say, okay, we want the name, but there's like some additional complexity here. We show the school number, which is essentially, if you remember the models from the beginning, foreign key lookup to schools, and then like looking up the number and showing this. So how would you do this in Django? Well, the old style way, right? You define an custom model admin, you say list display, you say name, then you say school number, then Django says, hey, what is school number? I don't know what that is. You have to define a property, right, admin display, where you can say ordering and description, and you have to tell Django, okay, look up object.school, which is the foreign key, .number, and then it knows what this is and shows it to the user. And I'm pretty sure many of you have like code like this and like very long admins, and it's very repetitive. Now it just understands underscore. Nice, simpler, less code, less tests you have to write. Also more consistent with the filter queries. So amazing feature. Yeah. One performance tip here, if you do that, probably most of you know, but still it's easy to overlook, right? You get 3 database queries because it actually does this lookup for every single entry in your list. So if you have 100 pupils, you will get 100 plus 1 lookup because it looks up the pupils, and then for each of the entries, it will look up the school. So don't forget to add list select related. It's nothing new, but I thought it's a nice tip because then it does the join, and instead of getting 100 database queries, you get 1. Yeah, especially is something you don't realize during development, but once you're in production, you have a lot of data, suddenly your admin gets slow. Doesn't have to be. Next one, customizable unique constraint errors. So let's suppose we want pupils to be not duplicated? Well, it should be identified by the data. So we say, okay, a name can be shared, but if a pupil has the same name and the same birth date, it's probably a duplication. So we don't want to allow it. How would we do that? We would say unique constraint on name and birth date, which is great. And if we do that, the Django automatically generates this error message. Pupil with this name and birth date already exists, which is also great. It's also translated. But let's suppose you want to customize this. Again, like, I don't know, we had a client, wasn't happy with this. The admin is great, but like, you need to customize it. It was really difficult because you could not access this error message easily. So the best way I came up with was you define a custom form, then you loop over the errors it produces when you call the superfull.clean. You figure it out, you pick it out, and then you kind of override it. It's just, I mean, it works, but it's not nice. Well, now you can replace this by nothing, and you just have to, you can add the, I mean, you could add this before, but it was like overwritten by Django. Now it gets respected. You get a violation error message. It just works. So less code, easier, like you can remove the full form. It's really great. Yeah. Finally, again, admin customization, but not only. It's actually not a minor feature now, but like it's still very nice and like helps you in a lot of ways. And so custom bound fields. What's different here from the default is we have this required in brackets. Again, real world example. Yeah, someone doesn't understand that bold means required and wants to really understand and have it explicitly there. So how would you change that? The old way, you probably would need to override the admin template. So you can set field sets. Then it's also great. Then you have if field, because it's special from the Django, dot field, which is the bound field, dot field, which is the real field you want to know, dot required. Well, you can already see it's probably a bit difficult. It works, yeah? Then you have this required. It only would also apply to the admin. So if you have other forms, you can handle this in a different way. Now you can just define your, probably not the best name, but it's a required bound field where you say, okay, this is my custom bound field, where I say, okay, if the underlying field is required, I change the label, adding this required, and then it's the cool thing, I can really decide on which level here. I do it on the form level, which is specified in the admin, so I can say, for all the fields in this form, use this particular bound field, so it automatically works for all the fields that are required, it gets added. I can also specify this on the project level. So say I want this to apply for all the forms I have in the project, or I can still apply it that was possible before 5.2 as well on the field level itself and define a custom field with an underlying custom bound field. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility. It makes your life much easier. And well, you don't have to hack into any admin templates. So really great. Still, because it's kind of nice, I wanted to mention it. There's another way to do that in 5.0 already. If you are not in the admin, you can say, okay, there's custom form rendering that allows you to actually have this intermediate level where you can say, I don't want to actually rewrite how the field is rendered itself, but I want to kind of customize how label field, like the input field and the error messages are changed. So you can register, again, on a project-wide level, on a form level, or for the field itself, a custom template for this, where you can override, you see here, like field.label, and you can say field.label.required, add the required brackets at the required brackets. This would only work for all non-admin forms, because admin does their own thing, so they don't respect this overwriting template because they have their own templates. But it's still really nice, and in particular, I wanted to mention it because if you want to format your forms somewhat, like labels, it's a really nice way to kind of not have to repeat yourself over and over again, because before 5.0, you really had to specify each field individually to do that. And with that, I'm coming to an end. So we talked about the simplification of URL building in views. So now, if you use reverse, you can explicitly specify the query string as a dictionary and the fragment as a string. probably remove a lot of custom code to handle this, to format your strings. Less string formatting is always great. You can do the same in templates with the query string template tag, allowing you, in particular for pagination, to override your query set partially, very nicely, very simple in the template. For client.get and tests, you can also now specify query parameters directly, allows you to write simpler tests. In the admin, we saw the lookup. It's just simpler with __, and how to adjust constraints for error messages. And finally, for forms, we have the bound fields, an example, how to use it, and form field rendering. And with that, thanks for your attention. If you want to contact, that's my LinkedIn. Thank you.
What's your favorite change in the 5.x?
The favorite change? That's a good question. I would say probably, I think the query string that simplifies pagination is really great. And also the customization of the error message, because you really, in the admin, because you really can, this was hard before.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. To the query string thing, it's a great thing, but is there a way to skip all the other parameters which are already in the request? Because in
the query string template tag, you mean?
Yeah.
You can explicitly set them to none, then they get removed.
Okay, but there is no special keyword or anything to skip everything except the things I add. Because if you have to set all
so I think in the context you provide to the template, you can give it a custom query dict. Usually it uses request.get to allow, so that right. You could do.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
I don't think it doesn't make sense really, because it would contradict. I don't think you can do it in the template tag itself.
Do you know if this change has been implemented in the source code itself of Django for the simplifications, for example, the forms, the admin and the testing? Or is this maybe some easy pickings for some people to pick up and refactor some of this into?
No, this is all done. I showed I showed always the version. So if you use the recent version 5.2, so if you upgrade to the to the recent long-term release, you will get all of these.
I mean, in the actual source of Django code, does all the test suite, do they use this stuff? Or I know this is now available.
Tests. Oh, I don't know. I haven't checked.
Yeah.
I would guess not all of them.
Okay,
but
so that's what I mean. It might be an
I think there will be a massive refactoring.
For people to refactor some.
To be honest, maybe the Django core tests don't use query strings too much, because you usually want to avoid those and use URL parameters. Just I constructed the example because you sometimes need them. So I would guess it's not too many, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question about the login required middleware. Is our login pages automatically exempt from that?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Obviously Django doesn't make your life more. Yes, so you can explicitly opt out, but I think the login page is because otherwise you could not log in as excluded.
Okay. And what's the recommended method for making certain views exempt from that? Is that the authentication classes to an empty list?
I think there is a new decorator, login not required, essentially. I think it's named slightly different, but yeah. It's okay.
Thank you very much.